For a long time, interview training has been seen as a one and done sort of component to the talent acquisition function. Sometimes we do it, sometimes we don't. Some managers get it, some won't. But once you listen to today's episode, hopefully you're going to change your mind, or at least see an alternative way. Here's what we've got coming up for you.
It's almost like a checklist, right? So like before you interview, can you talk about your company's strategy or your team's strategy and structural mission? Can you talk about your team's project direction and goals? Quite often I would ask the hiring manager, like, how would I sell this role to a top performer who's not looking? And sometimes they need to think about it, which is a concern, right? They should know why someone should want to join the organization. Have you actually read the resume properly and prepared your questions? Do you really understand what we're looking for? What are the essential skills versus desirable ones? How do you get the buy-in for that? So you might even want to start with creating maybe some kind of slide deck that focuses on the positive impact of investing in the interview training at the whole company level. So you want to highlight things like positive impact on the quality of hires, profitability, because getting your interview process, it's obviously depends on equipping your interviewers with the right resources, training, the knowledge. And when you get that process right, you not only start getting better candidates, but you actually save time, right?
I cannot stress this enough. Within this episode, there is a guaranteed blueprint that has seen Typeform scale its recruitment efforts through training and peer-to-peer learning that Margaret has shared. It's an exact method with times, modules, and processes. So stay tuned, listen out for it, and get that pen and paper ready, because I promise you, if interviewing training is something you are interested in, you will not be disappointed. Welcome to Tea Time with Talent Acquisition, the podcast aimed at fostering knowledge and sharing stories within the vibrant talent acquisition community. I'm your host, Eden, and for the next hour or so, I'm going to be joined by one of LinkedIn's certified top voices, principal recruiter and interview coach. I'm going to be joined by one of LinkedIn's certified voices, a principal recruiter and interview coach. This individual is closing in on 2 decades of recruitment experience across both technical and non-technical roles for leading organizations such as VMware, Cisco, Microsoft, Typeform, and now Mixmax. As an advocate for coaching, she has helped thousands of job seekers secure their next role and hundreds of hiring managers upskill on interviewing. It is a genuine pleasure to have her join me for a chat. So when you're ready, grab your favorite tea or coffee if you prefer, and join me in welcoming today's guest, the principal recruiter with the team at Mixmax, Margaret Bowie. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me, and thank you for the introduction.
I mean, your introduction is probably one of the easiest I've ever had to write because, one, you have such a great history in the industry. You've got such a profound LinkedIn as well. It makes it so much easier to kind of take information from there. And like I said, I'm a personal fan of the stuff you put out into the market and kind of what you actually do as an individual, which we'll get into a second, and we'll kind of learn a little bit more about your backstory. But let's call it like kind of the teaser, as it were. I want to kind of put a question to you, which I've been putting to everyone. And that one is around AI, and more specifically, where you feel AI has a place within the talent acquisition function. So give me kind of your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think AI has a lot of place in the talent acquisition function. I use AI even just to do research. I'm currently trying to find more SaaS companies. There's a couple of searches I'm working on. I'm just trying to find more organizations where I can find people from. And ChatGPT has been amazing in helping me to identify more SaaS companies in different locations, in different geographies. This is just so useful because it takes so much less time than Googling things, and it's just so much more accurate actually. So I use ChatGPT a lot for that. I know there are many different AI tools that help you screen candidates. To be honest, we don't do them. We don't use them at Mixmax. So I mostly use AI for research, for helping to improve job descriptions, maybe for help with some communication. But I think there's pluses and minuses to AI. I mean, even AI obviously can help you tailor your application, tailor your CV or your resume, but If you work in recruitment, you will also notice that now many people use it, and you can really tell that the CV
Yeah.
has been written by ChatGPT. So that's like another thing. You should never just copy and paste the output from any AI tools, and I think a lot of people do that. Initially, when ChatGPT came out, I actually did my CV myself. I made some. I used ChatGPT to make some small tweaks to my CV. And initially, I'm like, wow, that actually sounds great. That's so much better than what I would have done myself. But then when I started receiving all these different resumes of the exact same phrases, ChatGPT loves words like spearheaded and notable achievements. I've changed it all back to what it used to be and yeah, that's actually really advice for anyone. Like, don't just copy and paste the output from ChatGPT, because if you're a recruiter looking at hundreds of resumes every month, you will just see that these resumes look exactly the same. So yeah, many different uses, but that's probably a topic for another for another interview.
Yeah. And like I said, I'm just curious to understand where the market is, because I think if we go back to 4 months ago, I think when season 2 was first aired,
Yeah,
AI and within the talent function, it was kind of new at that point, and everyone was really gearing up to it. Then I had a conversation
yeah,
with a guy called Benas, who kind of flipped the script, and he was talking about kind of having more of that anti-AI perspective. And I feel like the market's
yeah,
kind of now going that way. And I put up a post
yeah.
about AI washing a couple of weeks back. And I feel like a lot of people kind of seen through the rose-colored glasses of what AI is and seeing it as actually a detriment a little bit to our industry at the moment, and kind of taking out that human element.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think another maybe drawback of AI is that you have all of these different tools that help job seekers apply for a position.
Mm,
That's unfortunately a problem as well, because I think a lot of companies are receiving an increased number of
yeah.
applications, many of which are not suitable for the position. And that's why if you're a job seeker, you look on LinkedIn and you see, 1,200 people applied for the position, but, you know,
Good
a
day.
thousand of them could be suitable for the role. So,
Yeah. Well, look, I mean, obviously, from the introduction, I shared a lot of things about yourself: an interview coach, principal recruiter, LinkedIn certified top voice. So, tell me a little bit about who you are. A little bit about your background, your journey, your career over the last, I mean, as I said, nearly 2 decades in the industry.
yeah. So very briefly, because you've described it really well yourself. But for the last few years, I've been helping companies attract and hire the best talent. I've been doing that for the 20 years, but for the last few years, mostly in engineering. And I recruit very internationally. I recruit extensively in Europe, also in the USA, Canada, and a lot in Latin America. So I've been working in the talent acquisition space since 2005, working for global technology and e-commerce brands such as Cisco, recruiting for Microsoft, VMware, Expedia, tech startups such as Yieldify, King, and Typeform. So 3 companies in B2B SaaS space. And obviously Mixmax now is the third one, and also in consulting. I worked on a contract for IT consulting company called Avanade. And during that time, I've recruited very internationally and across all different functions. I've recruited sales, marketing, finance, HR, engineering, you name it. I think most corporate functions I've worked on. And apart from that, my other passion is coaching. So I've worked as an interview coach since 2006. I've helped thousands of job seekers worldwide to get hired and promoted. I've worked with private clients across all career levels, from new graduates to managing directors in private, in public sector. And these clients have often landed roles at top Fortune 100 and 500 companies across different continents. So right now I work with a lot of clients in the UK, of course, but also with quite a lot of clients in the States. And apart from recruitment and interview coaching, I have quite a lot of experience training managers in various organizations on interviewing skills. So I've created and rolled out interviewer training for engineering at Typeform, and I've done more general interviewer training in other organizations. And right now I'm at a SaaS company called Mixmax, doing marketing, product, and engineering recruitment really across the globe, but it's mostly Latin America and Europe right now. Plus, of course, the interview training. So
Perfect.
that's me. And yes, I was very happy to receive that LinkedIn Top Voice. I've always been active on LinkedIn, but this year I really took it seriously. I post some advice for job seekers Monday to Friday every week. So yeah, I was really, really happy to get the LinkedIn Top Voice.
Well deserved. I mean, like I said, I'm a personal fan of what you share. I do genuinely believe what you're doing is making a big difference. So I'm glad you mentioned interviewing training a number of times, because when you brought this topic up to me in part of our kind of preparation for the podcast, it was one that nobody really wanted to kind of take on board properly. They took upon interviewing, coaching, and training in various forms, but you were sitting and saying, no, it's a standalone idea. It's a standalone thing we should be taking in, very importantly. So I'm super keen to kind of dive into this. So tell me from your perspective, why is the topic of actually training, hiring teams, training, hiring managers on effective interviewing, why is it actually important in the first place?
So it's really important because a talent acquisition professional or the recruiter can do the best job in the world. They can deliver the best candidate experience. They can get the candidate excited about the potential opportunity in the business. But then if the candidate experience is bad because the hiring managers are not prepared or bought into the process, they don't understand, what needs to happen, everything can fall down. And I think especially since the pandemic, candidates want more. They want more global opportunities. They want flexibility to work where they see fit. Of course, good salaries as well. The companies kind of like taking their holistic needs. Yeah, I mean, companies basically compete for global talent, which is something that they maybe haven't done before to the same level as it's happening now. So yes, we can, we hire remotely, but at the same, so on one hand, the access to world-class talent has never been easier. But hiring that world-class talent, that's a completely different story. So whatever patterns worked in the past, that may no longer be enough to guarantee that you'll be able to hire that top talent. So companies really have to compete on the quality of the employer experience, what they can offer, as well of course competing on compensation. So you need to be able to differentiate your culture and just build understanding of each candidate if you're going to stand out. So it's really important to create an efficient, rigorous, repeatable hiring process that attracts high quality candidates. It's just really essential because your interviews can really become your differentiator, because the good interview process showcases your culture, sells your brand, and just makes people want to work for you. So a good interview process helps you to understand the difference between a candidate that's great and a candidate that's great for this role and for your organization. And also the quality of your interviews really depends on training, and as I'm sure like interviewer training is really often overlooked in organizations.
Absolutely.
It's just not a priority because of limited time and resources, and you need to hire fast. And I've certainly worked for companies where it's like, I want this person like yesterday, so often it just doesn't happen. And another issue is that it's the same, like interviewers keep interviewing, so sometimes the interviewer just isn't calibrated on what good looks like in a specific organization they've joined, but sometimes it just honestly they've never had the training. So I actually remember a situation from a few years ago. I worked for, I'm not going to mention the name of the company, but I was recruiting for a CRM director in that organization. I actually ran interview training for this organization, and this specific individual refused to attend the training. He never accepted the invites, and he was the one who really needed it the most. So we had a situation when we had to hire a few contractors. It was for a pretty niche skill set. We were using recruitment agencies because these were contract positions, and in 1 week, I had 3 agencies calling me and saying, listen, like this guy, let's call him Mark. The feedback is so bad from the candidates that he just he interrogates them. He just he behaves like if he's doing them a huge favor, that he's even interviewing them. He doesn't explain anything about the role. He just basically interrogates them, and it got to the point that when the agency would contact a candidate, they've already heard from other people about this guy, and they'd be like, "Oh, is it working as team? No, thank you." So just imagine one person in an organization. Like everyone else could be trained, but you have one person who's just like a really bad, just someone who absolutely has no idea, and they don't even understand how important that candidate's experience is. And I'm sure that happened to you as well. Like if you have a bad candidate experience, you are much more likely to tell others people about it. That can ruin your company's reputation. And I've seen some research, I don't remember the exact data, but it was quite a significant percentage of people who, if they've had a bad interview experience with the company, they were much less likely not to ever buy from you, right? So it's like
You
if you
lose
really
candidate talent.
even one, yeah, even one bad interviewer can really damage reputation, of the company. So, and it doesn't have to be expensive program. I think cost could be a concern, right, from for many people, and it doesn't have to be expensive at all, in my opinion. Like, I remember many years ago when I worked for VMware, they paid for an external company to do this training. It was 2 days. The training was actually great, but it was like very expensive, in my opinion. In my opinion, 2 days maybe were not necessarily needed. And also 2 days in the training, that's kind of exhausting when you've got a full-time job to do, So yeah, I think they needed that to justify whatever they were charging, but you can easily do it like a half a day training or two half-a-day training, but it doesn't have to be expensive at all.
Yeah, I think obviously when it comes down to interviewing training, you kind of cover a lot. So just to reiterate, I do agree the training cost of it is what turns people away. So I think also coming from the talent acquisition, we'll get into kind of who should be driving it. I also feel like sometimes TAs right now maybe don't know how to start the conversation of, hey, you might need
Yeah,
some training, or what training, good training looks like, what bad training looks like. But I think you hit the nail on the head. A lot of managers fall into management, right? You're good at your job, so they're like, hey, you're good, so let's give you a team. And then you're going from a
yeah,
contributing, and all of a sudden you're
absolutely.
managing people, and you've never
Yeah,
really had to think about training or interviewing properly.
yeah,
Um,
yeah. And I've seen a huge difference between, like, in this one company, there were some managers who came like ex Amazon or whatever. They were amazing,
mm,
of course. They had a lot of training, and the difference between those and the other people who've not had the training, or maybe they just work for smaller companies, was really, really huge. So we had a different training for everyone, but I think, maybe people also could be afraid, like, how do you even get the buy-in for that? Like, if I need even some budget, how do you get the buy-in for that? So you might even want to start with creating maybe some kind of slide deck that focuses on the positive impact of investing in the interview training at the whole company level. So you want to highlight things like positive impact on the quality of hires, profitability, because getting your interview process, like, yeah, it's obviously like, depends on equipping your interviewers with the right resources, training, the knowledge. And when you get that process right, you not only start getting better candidates, but you actually save time, right? Because if you know what you're looking for, if you can, like, you don't spend months interviewing, and I've seen situations when the company is spending months interviewing someone that they still haven't found anyone, and they have 20 interviews, and it really shouldn't happen. If you know what you're looking for, if you know how to assess people, it really, it just really shouldn't happen.
it also helps you close candidates easier, I think, a good hiring process. And I think this is
Absolutely.
one of the
Yeah.
biggest
Yeah.
things that we see externally. I think we see a lot more variety of processes running. And obviously you're very experienced, you've seen lots of companies do the same thing, but I find those that really nail this down, their acceptance rate at the end is drastically higher than those. And I've just had it literally before we jumped onto this. I've just had a candidate who I had to reject 2 weeks ago because the company told me the person's rejected. And she just messaged me. An email says they've contacted me. They want to offer me 20 grand lower. I'm like, whoa. First of all, you're rejected. So I don't know where that's come from. Also, no one, that's just bad process start to finish. So that's bad experience, obviously, of what not to do. We'll get into what does it good look like from your side. So before we kind
Yeah,
of,
yeah, absolutely. And even like the length of the process. I
absolutely,
work for one company who used to have 6 interviews for each role.
that's
Now, for some
mental.
roles, like a manager, director, that could be fine, right? But if you're hiring a marketing assistant,
Was it standard
do
across
you
the
really
board?
need six? Yeah, standard across the board, 6 interviews for every position. And like, say in marketing, the last one had to be with the CMO. Why would you waste the CMO's time interviewing
Yeah,
marketing
it's
assistant
mental.
unless you're just a complete control freak?
Well, there's your
So yeah,
answer. I mean, I think it's quite interesting to see how much time it is wasted in interview processes. We actually we
huge.
created a calculator for that. So a fractional CTO friend of mine, he questioned it to me. I was like, it's a good point. I don't actually know. So we sat down, we did the formulas. I say we, mostly him. And we basically
Yeah,
worked out a way, and I'll actually probably attach it to this so people can read it. And you plug in numbers yourself and you can see the predictive cost in terms of
I'd love to
actual
see that.
time.
Yeah.
So you take in all the people in the process, work out that hourly cost of that individual, and then you plug in numbers and you see, how much time you've spent already or how much time you're predicted to spend per search. And it gives a really, clear way to say, holy shit, this job's been open for 3 months and we've already spent €12,000 looking for this person. there's your answer. Is it now right? So do we need this person? Do we need a contractor to do it? Do we need to change something? Do we need to push it to an agent? Whatever. You
Yeah.
kind of have a much better way
Yeah.
to analyze. It all comes back down to the people in the interview
Yeah.
process anyways.
And yeah, and it's also like not just one interviewer's time, it's the whole interviewer
Absolutely.
panel's time, right? Because there will be people from other teams, from your team. So just imagine if they interview even just 10 candidates and then you decide not to proceed because suddenly you've changed your requirements. I mean, that will happen actually, but just because you don't really know what
Yeah.
you're looking for, I don't know how to assess it.
So
So
tell me, from your experience, what does a good interview look like?
So, I think there are a few elements of an effective training program for interviews. It has to be intentional and proactive. It shouldn't be just like a checkpoint exercise, So you want to implement this training as just one of the processes in your organization hiring ecosystem so you can deliver better outcomes. And I think it's also important that it's ongoing. If it's just like a one-off and you never have any follow-up, I'm not saying that it's not effective because it's still better than nothing, but ideally it should be something that's ongoing because we forget things over time, right? So there should be some kind of follow up, and your team should be constantly sharpening their skills. It also should be
Sorry,
ideally
jump
peer
in.
driven and
What's the
collaborative.
frequency of that? Just why it's in my head.
Yeah, I think it just depends on who you are potentially interviewing. So, when was it at Photobox? I've trained over 100 people on interviewing skills, and for some people, so there were people there who were like very experienced interviewers. I did a separate session for them because there was no point mixing them with people who never interviewed before. And that was just more, we did a lot of stuff about unconscious bias. Like we didn't do the basics with these people. It was very quickly go through the basics. It was more about unconscious bias. How do you assess candidates for specific positions? We looked at specific competencies for the positions that they were recruiting for. And we did mock interviews during the session. So there was like a practical session. So with these really experienced interviewers, to be honest, there was no need for a follow-up because it was just to kind of introduce them to the process of the company and was it King of Audibles? But yeah, introduce them to the process of the company just to make sure that they understand what good looks like, what the competencies are, what the feedback should look like, etc. If it's people who have never interviewed before or they are pretty new, yeah, you do need to follow up. I mean, it just also depends. It depends on the company. It depends on how many resources you have. Because I've done some one-to-one sessions with some of these people later. If they were interviewing, I would help them come up with questions for a specific position. What questions they should be asking for that specific role, and it would be like a one-to-one session. But also, I've done follow-up. It was like 2 to 4 weeks later, just more mock interviews. So we've done a practical session with a little bit of a practical exercise during the session. But, people, you can't hold someone's attention for 4 or 5 hours, right? So I think it's better to do maybe like one session, will be 2 or 3 hours with some breaks, but then you do another follow-up and you do some practice session later and you give them some exercises. So I don't think you want to leave it for too late. I would say 2, 3 to 4 weeks,
Are you doing
latest.
this with people who are newly joining the company, or are you doing this every time a new job's being created in a particular team? How are we?
Oh, no. I mean, to be honest, it depends on the size of the company, because in the current company, it's slightly different. I've done the interview training. If someone is interviewing out, but just maybe have a one-to-one just to talk them through, what the process looks like. And we also have on Notion, I've created just the materials on Notion on like every aspect of the interview, so people can go and see, okay, well, this is example of a good scorecard. We use Greenhouse, or bad example of a scorecard. They can look at that, or they can look at examples of questions. So we have that material for people already. They can just look at that. It's pretty much like the content from the interviewer training, but we have it in a Mixed Max Talent University on Notion. But then in other companies, yes. So in my last company, the person couldn't, unless they were maybe a hiring manager, but typically we would give them, they couldn't really interview for the first 3 months because you're kind of still focusing on the position. Of course, there were exceptions. If they're experienced hiring manager, they needed to build a team, that was fine. But just in general, like let's say they were an engineer and they were taking part in technical interviews, we would give them 3 months first to like really get to grips with the role before before they were being interviewed. So, but then with the new people, we actually, because it depends on the I suppose on how much hiring are you doing. So at Type 4, because there was a lot of hiring, after doing the initial sessions for everyone, there was then a session. So like after a few people have joined, there will be another session.
Refresher.
So maybe like once every 6 weeks. No, that will be for the
Oh,
new
okay. So
people.
like
That
a
will be
new
for the new
cohort
people.
of people come.
That will be for
Okay.
the new people, for the new organization, but of course
Okay.
anyone could
So
join.
it just
So
depends on depends on your business, depends on how big you are, how much higher the
yeah,
frequency you can
yeah, it really
adjust.
depends on the business you're
Okay.
hiring, because if it's a difference if you're hiring 50 people a month versus
Yeah,
2, right?
absolutely. So we
Yeah.
create
So
the
so
training,
um so,
we
so
create the follow-ups, and then
yeah, so something ongoing. I mean, what we did, I can tell you later, like more about what we've done with at Typeform. But we had like a really there was a lot of hiring going on in engineering, so we had this shadowing and reverse shadowing program, and it just like created more ownership of training goals and knowledge transfer. But I really think it depends on the size of the organization. You want it to be personalized, of course. But there will be like an element of I think like a more general session that, well, it's always going to be personalized, but I would always do slight personalizations for for every team. So you might have to do one training session for everyone, but then I think it's important someone also gets like a specific training that's relevant to them. So it could be maybe shadowing a more experienced interviewer, or like reverse shadowing when you lead the interview, but there is an experienced interviewer observing you. And ideally you want to follow the same process. I mean, there will be, of course, a slightly different interview process for different positions, obviously, but you just want to follow the same the same best practices. So yeah, I think you just want to have certain best practices for entire company. And I think it's always good to also do a different training session for more experienced interviewers and like really inexperienced interviewers. Like everyone should be held to the same quality, but at the same time, if you have people at the C level, they obviously should not be in a session with people who've interviewed twice, right? So I think if you can, like you would want to split the people depending on the level of experience. And I think in terms of like what should be included in the training, I mean, that again really depends on the company. You might want to have things about like the basics of the interview process, what a specific process in your company is, how to use an ATS. Of course you can do that. Things about illegal interview questions, or at least questions that you shouldn't be asking, for example about age. And again, I've seen hiring managers asking those questions, even quite experienced ones. So you want to have stuff about behavioral interviews and how to probe for interviews, how to identify A players, unconscious bias training. So people typically are very interested in the different biases. It's not even about remembering the names of biases, because I often forget them myself, but it's like examples, which you share, like that's an example. And in the interview training I run, I will have examples from that specific company. It's like that happened last week, that basically like examples,
reinforcing
different
that it is
examples.
happening inside the business. This is why we're delivering the so it gets that
Exactly.
buy-in
Yeah.
again from people. So I've definitely sat in
Yeah.
training before and
Exactly
sat and
that.
went, do we need this? I mean, that's quite arrogant. I'm happy to own that, but I've sat in training where I thought, do I need to be here? But I still attend. But by reinforcing, actually, this is an example, and I've also had it myself when my example went up as something that was bad. I'm like, oh shit, yeah, I probably should be in this training then. Yeah, hands up, I messed up.
Yeah. Sometimes it's just good to have a reminder, because I have seen situations when panel interview. I remember we had this one, like she was actually young. She was a young UX designer. Anyway, but very accomplished, actually much more accomplished than many people, much older than her. And then this like really senior guy asked her, okay, how old are you? Okay, I mean, you just can't ask those questions. Like, I was so surprised he asked that, and she wasn't very
And
impressed.
I can see why.
That's
I
not
mean,
relevant to the role. She didn't get the role, okay, she didn't get the role not because of that. There was someone else who was stronger, but, you could be sued for discrimination. Like, you just can't ask those
because they
questions.
don't
So,
think about it,
and
they're not aware of the legalities of certain things. And
yeah,
again, this is why you do the training to
exactly. Yeah,
reinforce this back to them.
exactly that. And I think any training should have as many
Right.
examples as possible. And ideally use examples from your own company, because if you just give theory, no one would actually remember that. It's examples. This was happened last week. That's an example. That's an example of a bad scorecard. I would literally use an example of someone, I would not maybe mention the name, but I would use an example of why is it a bad feedback? Why is this a good feedback? So the more examples you use in the training, the better.
So we've got this kind of, I guess, case study that you've just alluded to a moment ago, because you mentioned we'll get on to Typeform. And I do want to get into it. So you've been delivering this to lots of different people, but you mentioned Typeform. So talk me through why is that a successful case study, and what was the impact that this training
Yeah.
actually delivered to the business?
So yeah, Sure. So yeah, actually the interviewer training at Typeform will be the best example because that was truly one that was ongoing. And yeah, so basically Typeform is a SaaS company. I was primarily doing engineering recruitment, and Typeform probably had about 100 people in engineering at that stage, or close to that. Obviously not all of these engineers were involved in interviews, but a lot of them at the senior engineer level were involved in coding interviews and system design interviews. So that was part of the job at the senior level. You had to interview. So when I joined, they already had a little bit of a process. There was a page on Notion. There was a list of experienced interviewers. There was a list of shadowers. So basically, like if you wanted to start shadowing, say, a coding interview or system design interview, you would shadow a few interviews. And then once you were ready to lead interviews on your own, you would become like a reverse shadow. So you would need to lead a few interviews with more experienced interviewers behind you. And once they gave you a thumbs up, you could kind of lead interviews on your own. So they kind of already had that, but it was not really updated. Like there was no one like owning, the program. So they were updating the page themselves. There was actually no proper process in place. They were just, okay, well, now I'm feeling ready. So, I'm going to start interviewing. So everyone was updating everything on Notion themselves. It actually wasn't necessarily regularly updated. There were still people there who've already left because no one removed them. So, it was working to an extent because you had a list of interviewers for back-end interviews and for front-end interviews, but it wasn't scalable because, it just wasn't scalable considering how much interviews was going on, how many interviews we had on a weekly basis. Plus there were people there who were maybe good at technical interviews, but they actually never had a formal interviewer training session, right? So they could still potentially ask some questions that should not be asking. So they were never taught, how to question someone, how to probe someone, how to avoid bias. And even though most of these engineers were doing technical interviews, I quite often would see like scorecard feedback from some greenhouse later that they really had to dig the information out, they really have to push for the information from the candidate, that the candidate wasn't providing. So you still need some questioning skills, even if it's a system design interview, So basically what I've done, firstly, I've created an interview training, like a general interview training session, which is probably 2.5 hours. And that session covered, the interviewer basics, unconscious bias, how to prepare, the interview process for different positions, what the different levels are. So we were mostly recruiting for mid-level engineers, senior level engineers, and sometimes engineering managers. So, what's required at different level, behavioral interviews, how to prepare for them, what questions to ask, questioning and listening skills. We had exercises, how to sell the business during the interview, and also how to provide feedback with examples of what a good scorecard looks like, or, what a bad scorecard looks like. So that was one session. And I probably ran like 10 separate sessions because, it's difficult to get availability of 100 people in total. So there were several sessions. And apart from that, there was another session that we decided to run as a separate session, just because it's difficult to keep people's attention, for more than 2.5 to 3 hours. So there was another session, which was 90 minutes, and that was run by an engineering director. And that was more like a technical interviewer training session. So I would schedule these sessions, but it would be run by an engineering director. And basically that was what was covered in the interview is just how is the coding interview different for level 2, which is the mid-level engineer, or versus level 3, which is a senior engineer. System design interview, what's included, what are the different levels within the organization, what are we looking for in each level. So again, so that was that was actually that was really good. All the interviewers had to do the training, and then the new interviewers, they would need to sign up. It was actually a Google Sheet, but we'll move that to Notion later. They would need to come to me, say they want to start shadowing a specific interview. I would add them to the spreadsheet. Once they've done a few of those, once they were ready to reverse shadow, I would move them to that stage, and then I had to get like a 2 thumbs up sign from experienced interviewers to prove that this person was ready to lead interviews on their own. So that was so I was kind of owning the whole process, just to make sure this, it's all in order. Like another rule was that the person had to be within the business for more than 3 months before they started interviewing. And so we had over 100 people who've attended the training. It's in terms of the results, what was really good. I mean, first we had a lot more people who would conduct the interviews, which really sped up the process with which we could hire engineers. So yeah, just the speed at which people have qualified to conduct interviews on their own was really great. Also, the quality of feedback has improved so much that I was getting just really amazing. Like I was getting such good scorecards from these engineers after different interviews that I can't tell you how many times I would be rejecting a candidate and they actually said that was the best feedback I've ever received, because at least they understood what they could improve. So yeah, okay, I didn't get hired, but at least I knew what to improve. And it was actually very rare as well that someone disagreed with feedback. So that was great. That obviously worked really well. And another thing we did later, that was actually engineering. That was one of the hackathons, but it was amazing. And I would really recommend it. Like I wish we had actually had that here. So the engineering team created like an interviewer app. And because I had to schedule a lot of interviews. I probably had 20 positions open at the time. There were other technical recruiters. There was a lot, right? So we had a few technical recruiters. We had several, different interviewers. But how do you make sure that you don't use the same interviewers all the time? Like I don't know who my colleagues are using, right? So how do you check which interviewers was paired with another one? You don't want to pair the same interviewers the whole time as well. So these fantastic engineers, they've created an app where you could go to the app, you would look at the person, for either system design or backend or front end or a coding interview, backend, or front end. And you could basically look at the name of the interviewer and check how many interviews they've run recently, how busy are they right now. If they're in red, that means they're completely swamped. If they're yellow, they're okay. Green, you can actually book them. And you can also see the last 5 pairings. Who else? Because there were 2 people in the live coding interview, right? So, or was it the system design? There were 2 people in an interview in any case. So you could look at the last 5 pairings just to make sure that you can maybe pair them with other people. So that's worked like really, really well, massively improved the process. Engineers were much happier as well because they were not, they were not being asked to do 10 interviews per week. So yeah, it was really great in terms of the quality of feedback and in terms of how many more interviewers we had to conduct the interviews.
I love that, by the way. Start to finish, that entire answer. I'm in awe, genuinely, just because 11 years I've been a recruiter now. And of course, I see it from the external side of things, but that is probably the most thorough awareness I've seen any company go to, try and improve their processes, because that's not just training, that's satisfaction, that's retention, that's productivity, it's candidate experience, and that's all just by stemming from saying, okay, we've got something here, that's shadowing, reverse shadowing, but let's improve it. Let's get everybody on the same page. And as you said, you've been able to free up time. Productivity, I imagine, increased in certain components because people aren't always, I see this a lot. You get the best seniors and they're always in interviews during hiring sprints and it becomes a headache. Then they have to take holidays usually so they can decompress. So I think, if anyone's just listened to that is a textbook example. Like that is, I would be sitting there right now with my notepad and pen going, writing everything down, saying, guys, I've just got a brand new idea. Who wants to get in a room and see how we can improve our model?
Yeah, that was really good. Especially that interviewer app was so good. I don't know how they did that. It was just one of the hackathons. They had it, I think, at the end of every quarter, and they just literally built that during a 2-week hackathon. So
there's got to be a way that could be created. I mean, I'm bringing up the AI stuff now, but it's got to be something where you could do that. Yeah, easy now.
There has to be something. Yeah, I mean, they did it in 2 weeks. There were like 3 or 4 people from one team that did it in 2 weeks, and it honestly worked really well. So, I'm sure there is.
To wrap this up, so I do appreciate you've taken some time to go through this. What's the number one piece of advice that you usually give hiring teams before they actually go out and interview?
Yeah, I know it's a good question. I'm not sure there's just one piece of advice, right? Because
2 or 3
like
then.
when you prepare for an No, just like briefly. But I think, it's almost like a checklist, right? So like before you interview, can you talk about your company's strategy or your team's strategy and structural mission? Can you talk about your team's project direction and goals? quite often I would ask the hiring manager, like, how would I sell this role to a top performer who's not looking? And sometimes they need to think about it, which is a concern, right? They should know why someone should want to join the organization. Have you actually like read the resume properly and prepared your questions? Do you really understand what we're looking for? What are the essential skills versus desirable ones? And also, if you're the hiring manager, I think it's really important you coordinate with your team so you don't ask all the same questions. And here at Mixmax, we have this pre-flight document. We have every interview stage mapped up before every interview, and even interview questions for each stage. Because I'm sure you've seen that many times, right? It's like, yeah, you have 3 interviewers, but it's like the same interview 3 times. No, every interview should have a different focus. So you should coordinate with the team. Should be able to explain the next step in the hiring process and answer kind of like any questions about career progression or perks. So this isn't just one; it's just overall preparation. But yeah, I think knowing what is it that you're looking for is very important, and being able to sell the company. Being able to sell the company. Really like sell the mission of the company, why your team specifically, why they should want to join your company.
I see this quite, and just to throw my
important.
2 cents into it as well, that's a telltale sign for me as an external recruiter as well. So when I'm, for example, speaking to a new business, a prospective business, whoever, my question to them is, I'm a candidate, how would you sell me the job? Because I want to know how you sell it versus how I need to kind of mix it up. And the amount of HR managers, tech recruiters, senior leadership who and are, it's quite shocking. And I think that's where it comes down to. I think it needs to be not just on talent acquisition. Don't get me wrong, we play a big part. But if we want to move the needle from, hey, we're just here to deliver candidates to you, to actually, no, we are a business partner to you, this needs to be ownership on us. We need to be pushing this into companies and say, like, no, we need to do better, or we need to make a drastic improvement somewhere.
100%. I think, that's very, very important. That's literally like one question I always ask a new hiring manager: how would you sell this opportunity to someone who's not actively looking? Because I'm going to the market and headhunting typically.
Yeah.
Like, I need to be able to sell it, right? So why is this a good opportunity? And if it's an engineering role, well, they want to understand the projects they would work on, the technologies, obviously, the tech stack, opportunities for progression. So you need to have this information. You won't always have it all, but you should have as much as possible.
As well. You're going to market trying to find a top 5%, and then there are 1 or 2 chances to get these people in. You miss your boat, you missed your boat. I do appreciate you spending some time and like I said, really giving us a very thorough blueprint essentially to what makes an effective interviewing program. So I appreciate that. If people want to find you, they want to connect with you, what's the best way to do it?
It's probably the best on LinkedIn. So there's just one. I think there's just one Margaret.
I will put a link for anyone who wants to find it in the. Perfect. Well, thank you so much for taking the time. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you very much for your time. You too.